articulatory phonetics, we classify speech sounds in terms of how they're made. So to do this, we need to know something about the parts of the body used in speaking. It will be very helpful to you as you learn and work with another language to understand how some of the sounds of that language are physically produced. Together, the parts of the body used for producing speech sounds are referred to as the vocal tract. Most speech sounds, including all those used in English, are produced with air pushed up and out from the lungs. The air goes through a tube called the trachea, also called the windpipe, then through the box of cartilages called the larynx. Inside the larynx there are two muscular folds. These have traditionally been called the vocal cords, though in fact they're not strings but folds, so many people refer to them as the vocal folds. Air then passes through the oral cavity, the mouth, and sometimes through the nasal cavity, the nose. Most speech sounds involve air coming out. They are egressive. A few sounds in some languages involve air sucked inwards. They are ingressive. Most speech sounds involve air coming all the way up from the lungs. They are pulmonic. So, most sounds in most languages are pulmonic egressive sounds, made when air comes up from the lungs and then out. A few sounds in some languages involve air pushed in or out just from the mouth with the larynx closed. They are glottalic. Sounds with the larynx closed and the air pushed out of the mouth, egressive glottalic, are ejectives. Sounds with the larynx closed and the air sucked into the mouth, ingressive glottalic, are implosives. A few sounds in some languages involve air drawn into the mouth with the back of the mouth closed. They are ingressive velaric. These are clicks. The vocal folds, sometimes called the vocal cords inside the larynx, can be positioned in a number of ways. These different positions are called glottal states because the glottis is the space between the vocal folds. Different glottal states create different kinds of sounds. For describing the sounds of Australian English and most other languages, we only need to know about two of these, voiced and voiceless. Voiced sounds involve the vocal folds being close together but not tightly closed. Air can still flow out between them, and when it does, it makes them vibrate. This vibration is called voicing. You can feel it if you touch your throat while making the z sound in buzz. If, on the other hand, the vocal folds are held relatively far apart, they won't vibrate when the air passes between them. This glottal state is called voicelessness, and sounds involving this state are called voiceless sounds. An example of a voiceless sound is the s sound, as in bus. If you touch your throat while making this sound, you won't feel the vibration that you feel when making the z sound. When the vocal folds are apart, a voiceless sound will result, and when they are together, a voiced sound is made. A traditional way of classifying speech sounds, and one that everyone is familiar with, is the distinction between vowels and consonants. Basically, the difference is that consonants involve some significant obstruction of the airflow, either complete obstruction or enough narrowing to cause noise, while vowels don't involve a significant obstruction. Say the following English vowel sounds out loud. A, E, I, O, U. Now say the following consonants and listen to the difference. B, D, F, G, K, M, Z. Did you notice the different ways in which you obstructed the flow of air with your lips, tongue and teeth as you made the second set of sounds? One group of sounds called glides is in between consonants and vowels. Glides are like vowels in articulation, the way they're said, but they pattern or function as consonants in the way they're used. For this reason, glides are usually put with the consonants in tables. So in the standard IPA chart, there's no separate row for glides. They're placed among the approximants, which I'll explain soon. As well as glottal state, voiced or voiceless, consonants are classified by two factors. One is which vocal organs are used to obstruct the flow of air. We call this the place of articulation. The other is how much obstruction there is and what kind of obstruction it is. We call this manner of articulation. To identify the place and manner of articulation of consonants, we first need to look again at anatomy. So here is a diagram of all the parts used to make sounds. We talk about the relevant parts of the anatomy as the passive or upper articulators and the active or lower articulators. The passive articulators in general don't move. These include from the front to the back, the top lip, the top front teeth, the alveolar ridge, the ridge behind the upper front teeth, the palate, the hard part of the roof of the mouth, also called the hard palate, the velum, the soft palate, and the uvula, the soft appendage hanging from the velum, and finally the rear wall of the pharynx, the tube above the larynx. The active articulators move up and down to make contact with the passive articulators, and they include the bottom lip, the bottom front teeth, and the tongue. The tongue is very important in speech, and different parts of it are used to make different kinds of sounds. These include the tip or apex, the most forward part of the tongue, the blade, the zone just behind the tip, the front, which lies below the palate when at rest, the back, which lies below the velum when it rests, and the root, the lowest part in the back of the throat. As we said, the place of articulation is which vocal organs are used to obstruct the flow of air when a sound is made. As you can imagine, there's a fairly large number of possible places of articulation. For now, we're going to concentrate on the ones in Australian English, which is my dialect, and those consonants include the following, going from the front of the mouth toward the back. The bilabial place of articulation involves the upper and lower lips. The airstream is stopped or highly obstructed by the lips being together or very near each other. The labiodental place of articulation involves the lower lip and the upper front teeth. Dental sounds are made with the tip or blade of the tongue touching or being very close to the upper front teeth. Sometimes the tongue is between the upper and lower front teeth, and we can call these interdental sounds. Some people say the two TH sounds of English, as in thing and this, as interdentals. In fact, I do. But many speakers of English don't have their tongue between their teeth for these sounds, but behind and close to the upper teeth. In any case, interdentals are a kind of dental sound, so we call the TH sounds dentals. If the tongue tip or blade makes contact with or is very close to the alveolar ridge, we say the alveolar place of articulation is involved. If the tongue blade comes close to or touches the back of the alveolar ridge or just behind the alveolar ridge, we have palato-alveolar sounds. Some people use the term alveopalatal, but this should be avoided. Sounds made with the front of the tongue and the palate are called palatal sounds. Those made with the back of the tongue and the velum are velar sounds. And finally, obstruction of the glottis is called the glottal place of articulation. There are other places of articulation which come up in other accents of English and/or other languages. These include the following. Uvular sounds involve the back of the tongue and the uvula. These occur in Inuktitut and Arabic, among many other languages. Pharyngeal sounds involve a narrowing of the airflow in the pharynx and are found in Hebrew and Arabic and some other languages. There are a number of exotic places of articulation that occur in a very few languages. For example, some languages of Vanuatu have sounds using the linguolabial place of articulation, in which the tongue touches or comes close to the upper lip. Remember that we said manner of articulation is about the type and degree of obstruction of a consonant. Some sounds involve total obstruction of the airstream. Air is pushed up out of the lungs, but one articulator moves to make contact with another to completely block air from escaping out of the mouth. After a fraction of a second, the articulator moves away and the air, which had been compressed in the mouth or throat, rushes out. These are called oral stops, or just stops for short. The b and p sounds in English are stops, and they are bilabial stops. The air from the lungs is momentarily blocked by the two lips being together, and then it's released. We can now fully name some sounds of English, and we'll give the IPA symbols for them as well. The name of each consonant usually has at least three parts: voicing, place of articulation, and manner of articulation. So the p sound, as in the word spin, is called a voiceless bilabial stop because of how it's made. It's voiceless because the vocal folds are apart when the air from the lungs passes between them, so they don't vibrate. It's bilabial because the place of articulation involves the upper and lower lips, where the airstream is stopped by the lips being together. And it is a stop because the air is completely blocked. The symbol for it, not surprisingly, is the English letter P. Most consonants come in voiceless and voiced pairs, and this is true here. The b sound, as in boy, is made just as the p is, except that the vocal folds are close together and therefore vibrate when the air passes between them. The symbol for it is a letter B, and we refer to it as a voiced bilabial stop. There are stops using other places of articulation as well. If the tip or blade of the tongue touches the alveolar ridge, it will block air that's coming up from the lungs. If the vocal folds are not vibrating, it will make a voiceless alveolar stop. For example, the t sound in the word sting, for which the symbol is a letter T, like this. If the vocal cords are vibrating, we have a voiced alveolar stop. The d sound in the word dog is an example, and the symbol for this sound is the letter D. In English, there are also velar stops with the back of the tongue touching the velum. A voiceless velar stop, for which the symbol is the letter K, occurs in the word skin, and a voiced velar stop is found at the beginning of the word go. The symbol for it is the letter G. The velum, or the soft palate, is movable. If it is in a lowered position, it is not touching the back of the throat. If it is raised, it is touching the back of the throat. And when that happens, air can't escape into the nasal passages and out through the nose. In fact, all the sounds we've talked about so far, as well as in most speech sounds in general, the velum is in this raised position, so air can't escape out through the nose. This means that for the stops like b and k, while the obstruction is being made, no air is escaping out anywhere, not out of the mouth because of the obstruction somewhere, and not out of the nose because of the position of the velum. When the obstruction is ended, air is released out of the mouth, but it still can't escape out of the nose because the velum is still against the back of the throat. However, it is possible to make a complete obstruction somewhere in the mouth, but at the same time have the velum lowered, which means that air is only escaping out through the nose. Sounds that are made this way are called nasal stops, or nasals for short. In English, we have a bilabial nasal. Just as with p and b, air is briefly prevented from escaping out the mouth, but it continuously goes out through the nose because the velum is lowered. The first consonant of mother is such a sound. As with b, you should feel your lips together. Nasals are generally voiced, so they don't come in pairs like stops do, although voiceless nasals are possible and occur in some languages such as Burmese. So the full name of this sound at the beginning of mother is a voiced bilabial nasal, although we often leave out the voiced because we assume that nasals are voiced unless otherwise specified. The symbol for it is the letter M. There's also a voiced alveolar nasal, which is just like D, except that the velum is lowered so that air flows out through the nasal passages and the nose. The symbol for it is the letter N, and we find it at the beginning of the word no. English also has a voiced velar nasal. The word sing doesn't end with a n followed by a g, it ends with a single consonant, the velar nasal. With the symbol for the velar nasal, we have our first symbol that's not also a letter of the English alphabet. It's an N with a hook on the right leg turning to the left. Other languages have nasals involving other places of articulation. For example, many languages, such as Spanish, have a palatal nasal, represented by an N with a hook on the left leg pointing to the left.